Well, what I want to continue on, we're still in this subject of warfare, and like I've always looked at it differently than what I've come across over the years. And I found that in some ways it's there's a little bit of a ignorance and bliss, or bliss and ignorance. That's what I was looking for. Wow, talking about warfare. But most of it is, I would say, in the mind. Like that's where the big battle is. And I keep referring back to the 3 battlegrounds from Francis Frangipane, and that really, like, I got a hold of that book.
Oh, the 3 battlegrounds.
Yeah,
I have that book.
when I was younger in the Lord, or when I was younger in general too. Because when I was younger in the Lord, I was also younger in general too. But as I was younger, I felt like that kind of sculpted the way that I saw things, especially in the charismatic church, which I was heavily involved in. And so being involved in the charismatic church, but not getting mixed up into the mentality of warfare, in the sense of how a lot of people tend to, they almost kind of invite it into their life because they're so focused on defeating whatever's going on in their life. And it could just be so much easier handled if we didn't get so much involved in that. And our lives would be easier if we could just kind of step outside of it. But instead, we find ourselves diving right into it and just eating every bit of fruit that kind of comes with it. And there's a little bit of freedom from not being so involved in that. Hold on, I'm going to look up something real quick. And so what I've seen is, I would call what we have a lot of strongholds. And I've always seen like a stronghold, like a castle inside the mind, or like a fortress, because it's holding something captive. It's holding something, I guess if you would, it's trying to protect something. So even when you look up the definition of a stronghold, you see it's a place that has been fortified so as to protect it against attack. So we set up a stronghold trying to protect ourselves.
It could be a trauma response.
It could be a trauma response, a belief system. Just stop reading my notes, please. Well, I don't need to teach anything now because we've already done it. It's a place where a particular cause or belief is strongly defended or upheld. And so, like, we develop a lot of those over time, over the course of history.
So would a stronghold be, quote unquote, an unhealthy boundary?
A stronghold could be an unhealthy boundary, could also just be a boundary that we're blanketing as something healthy. What are we use boundaries as defense mechanisms because we're trying to hide something from other people. Because we're trying to protect it. I'm going to use this boundary to keep you away from whatever's going on here, because it sounds wise. But what are we actually trying to protect? Because there's a difference between a boundary and like just healthy lifestyle, or a balanced lifestyle, I guess, if you would. But oftentimes the word boundary is being utilized as a defense mechanism. And if we're not allowing people in that area of our lives, I would extend to the place that there's a good chance if we're not allowing people into a place of our lives, we're not allowing the Lord into that same place. And so is this a boundary or a defense mechanism? But we'll kind of get a little bit later in that. Strongholds in the mind, like I said, are like kind of like castles, and they're used to protect and keep a certain order of things in the way that we like them because of circumstances that have happened around us or situations, and so we've created these protective measures. It's funny how you instantly get a boundary after you get hurt. Coincidental? So when we find ourselves in these places of always double checking things, overthinking scenarios, how often, we develop phobias of things, but we instantly, even saying that can create defense mechanisms because I don't have a phobia. It's just wise for me to do this.
That is wise. I mean, let's say you're taking a math test, and because you don't double check your work, you make mistakes. So you learn from that, and then the next math test, you double check your work. Now, that's a healthy response.
Right. But that's what I mean by double checking things is like there are times in people's lives where we are, say, you locked the door, but because of a defense mechanism, you go back and double check that door again, or you unplug everything because we're afraid of something may happening. It's kind of like I have a running water dish for my cat. It's electric, and it's water, but. And it's a cat. And it's my cat on top of that. And with that, we have to start thinking like, have we created a stronghold in our mind, a belief system in our mind, even though we could say, well, this is wisdom. But there would be people that, that may completely think I'm insane by leaving that thing plugged in all the time. But that's literally what a fish aquarium does. And I've had crazier fish than cats. And so when we create a system or a formula of a way of thinking, and then what happens is because of the condition that's going on inside of our mind, we start looking for something to substantiate the way that we're thinking. You can find facts about anything anywhere. Well, smoking is dangerous and bad for you. Well, you can also find studies that says eating too much applesauce is bad for you as well. So we develop these ways of thinking and then what happens is we start finding supportive arguments to substantiate in the way that we're doing something, and we start defending it. One thing that I notice is when I start defending something in my life, defending why I'm doing it, you ever had like one of those moments of like you're driving and you're kind of creeping like as you're at a light, because you're like, I'm anticipating it to be green, and all of a sudden you have you're like having an argument in your head about why you're doing that. Well, you must be like someone else I know that just runs stop signs for no reason. Or you drive down the road, like let's say you were going to what's the store next to you? Kroger. I almost called it Kmart. You're going to Kroger. What is it, like a mile and a half, 2 miles away? But you just hop in your car. And you just hop in and drive there, but you're not even like consciously thinking, oh, I need to put on my seatbelt, X, Y, and Z. But then you find yourself like literally right in front, like at that light at Walgreens and whatever that is, and you're about to turn into Kroger, but you find yourself start justifying it as like in the event of invented situation in your mind of you getting pulled over and explaining to the cop why you didn't have your seatbelt on.
Why is that exactly what I've done before?
Because it's something I do. But that's like these scenarios that we create, and we start trying to find supportive arguments for what we've done that doesn't necessarily coincide with what should be done or how a thing should be done. And so we start finding these supportive arguments, and we start, or like you start having an argument with somebody inside your head that you didn't even actually have the conversation with to create the argument in the first place. There's an offense. So we create these ways of thinking because they cause change. We defend what we're doing because we don't want to experience the proposed change that could possibly come from this because it's uncertainty. And so this warfare is taking place in our mind. And if we really get down to it, most of the warfare that's taking place in our mind is because of some type of fear-based element that is taking place up here. There's some form of inferiority type mentality, insecurity thing. That's exactly what the enemy played into in the garden the whole time. Was he presented the possibility of their likeness of being like God was not fully secure. The reason why God doesn't want you to eat this tree is because you'll become like him. They were already like him, so what were they lacking? It reminds me of years ago when I was living in Northern California, there was a gentleman, and he was deaf. And we're going to call him John to protect the innocent, but everybody called him like Deaf John. And Deaf John would help, before we had a projector for worship, Deaf John would help with putting the slides. You remember when we had overheads? He would put the slides, which I found a little ironic. Deaf John would also help with sound on Sunday morning. These are things I didn't understand when I first showed up. And many times there would be opportunities for prayer for healing. But Deaf John, he would get in line. He would get in line for anything and everything except for healing, because he didn't want even the possibility of getting in line, say hypothetically for a hernia, and God heal his ears. Because if God healed his ears, he would no longer receive the financial support for being disabled, which would cause change in his life that he had never had to deal with before. But we all have areas of deafness in our life that we are prohibiting God from moving in our lives because we're afraid of the change that it would cause us to actually have to go through, because change can be scary. So we develop a form of thinking and we find facts to substantiate why we believe what we believe and how we believe it, and then we become on a defensive route of why we believe that. And so we develop these different types of strongholds in our mind. And so we find ourselves battling with neurotic behavior traits and obsessing over scenarios and creating things that maybe don't even exist in the first place. We find ourselves dealing with, this will never change. We're in this place of woe is me type thinking. These are all conditions and forms of thinking. I'm always going to be the butt end of this life experience. I'm always going to go through these cycles and these things that are happening. These things are never going to change. We find ourselves being overly self-aware, overly self-conscious in every situation. I can't talk about this. If I talk about this, people are going to think this. And so we've created these ways of thinking, these mentalities of doing things instead of allowing the Lord to just move and flow in our life. And so we've created these castles in our minds and in our hearts that this is how things have to go. This is how things have to operate and function. This is warfare in the mind. Because God doesn't give you insecurity. He doesn't give you an unsound mind. Paul even says, I wish you weren't double-minded. So like even when we're finding ourselves in those double-minded moments and like almost indecisiveness, I guess you could say. And I'm not talking about when we're sitting at a restaurant, we don't know if we want like, the garlic parmesan wings or the traditional buffalo wings. But when we find ourselves like we're back and forth constantly, you could see it with David in the Psalms. He was at one minute he was like, God, you are my rescue, and the other minute he was like, God, you've delivered me into the hands of my enemies. And so we find ourselves in those places. Like we talked about last week. The waters of the mind are not still. That means we don't have peace. Everything's agitated. But what do you guys think are some other areas of what warfare may look like in the mind? Anxiety is one of them, definitely. Insomnia. Negative thinking. Criticism of others, definitely. Self-criticism.
When you say insomnia, that can be like spiritual warfare?
Yeah. I mean, promises in Scripture. Insomnia can be spiritual warfare simply because God promises like sound sleep, like rest. So when you're not at rest, because usually what's happening when you're experiencing insomnia? Racing thoughts, all sorts of craziness going on in your mind. It's not like you're sitting there writing haikus.
Sometimes I like to play my guitar a little bit into the night, but...
Right, but you're not writing a haiku.
Right. Yeah.
You're not, and there's a difference between like, I don't know why I emphasized on haikus all of a sudden. But I mean, there's a difference between I'm not sleeping because I want to play my guitar versus I can't sleep because my mind is overwhelmed and I'm beyond exhaustion. I'm overwhelmed. It's different. So, self-pity, disappointment, self-preservation. That's a huge one for me right now. Like the Lord is like, not even like self-preservation and like trying to keep myself from dying. Like that's just, like a dur. But like trying to save face. And, well, God, I know they're taking advantage of me. That's great. Keep going. That is not the words I want to hear. Expose, strike down. Pouting. I think pouting is a big one for us. It's not going the way I want. So I'm going to pout. And I'm just not going to participate because it's not going how I think it should go. I'm sorry, Cupcake. There's an underlying denominator. All these things are self-focused. And they don't align with the mind of Christ. They're carnal forms of thinking. They're not looking at it from the window of Philippians 4:8. Brothers and sisters, focus on those things that are pure, that are lovely, that deserve praise, those things that are of God. Focus on those things. And it continues on. But let's take disappointment. How can disappointment be a form of mental warfare? Well, it's
Satisfied with if you're always disappointed, you find satisfaction.
right.
Lose hope.
Lose hope. Hope deferred makes the heart sick.
It can affect your prayer life. I've struggled with not wanting to continue faith in certain areas for certain prayers because fear of God not coming through.
Right.
I mean, it's not that I don't trust God. It's just I battle with my past inner child who grew up with broken promises.
Right.
And now I'm trusting a God who's like, you can always, trust that I'm going to come through.
Right. And that is a challenge for us to understand that God is going to come through. It's just not always as we think it's going to happen.
Right.
Or how we want it to happen. We want God's provision to descend from above, from a dove, carrying a bow, while riding a seal from heaven, and then drop off a bag of money. While other times, more realistically, provision's going to come through a friend.
It's hard to unlearn that. If you were taught that in church,
Yeah.
that a relationship with Christ is all sunshine and rainbows all the time.
Mm-hmm.
It's hard to look at it like this is the real version of it.
Yeah, it is. It is very challenging because popular teaching that says everything is going to be A-okay all the time. And then if it's not okay, you're living in sin. We even have a joke literally in the office is it'll if something's going wrong, like, are you living right? But there's always something going disarray. The week I had the flu, my car got towed. I had a flat tire. I also had I had to take an Uber, still recovering from the flu, to get my car from the tow yard that when it shouldn't have been towed in the first place, then to get a flat tire in that same week and still have the flu. And then I think at another point I had to, there were other things that were going on as well that I had to take care of. And someone goes, are you okay? Is the devil running rampant in your life? Do you need to repent of something? And I was like, no, I'm pretty sure I got the flu because I'm out with people. And that's what happens. Somebody doesn't know they're sick and it's running wild. My car got towed because I have no clue. To be perfectly honest. It's still a mystery to me. But the natural inclination in all of that, woe is me. Because then it becomes the devil. But if you just allow it to be water off of your back like you were a duck, You just go, all right, no big deal. And you just keep going. So, yeah, you're in the situation. It's not going as expected or as you want. But when that's happening, what our normal response, hunker down, head down, and just keep driving. Like all of a sudden we all became running backs in life. And we're just going to drive with our shoulder and just go for it. But these are actually indicators that maybe we should take a step back. And Lord, what are you doing in this? Because maybe there's going to be a pivot of direction. Or he's going to say, you know what? Put your head down, tuck in, and lead with your shoulder. But when he says it, what comes with that? When he speaks to you, hunker down and keep driving, keep moving forward, there's faith. Because now there's an impartation of faith that takes place, because faith comes by hearing and hearing by the word of God. And so when his words come forth, it deposits a substance of faith, a substance of things hoped for. A tangible faith is given to you in that moment to continue moving forward. So now you're no longer moving forward on your own and striving. Now you're working with the Lord. But oftentimes what happens is adversity comes, and instead of going, Lord, what do I do with this adversity? We just continue in the same direction. But God may have you pivot so when the winds of adversity come, the sails of your life catch the winds and they propel you along. And so instead of trying to go against the storm, he gives you the proper position and the grace to ride the storm. Man shall not live by bread alone, but every word that proceeds out of the mouth of God. We could look at bread in this manner of, there's a lot of work that goes into making bread. I've watched people do it. I myself have not. But I've watched people make bread. There's a lot of mixing, waiting, pounding, waiting, kneading, waiting, rolling out, waiting, rising, waiting, baking, waiting. It's a lot of work. But it's a lot of work, and it's an example of man's striving. Yeah. And so we would rather eat by the sweat of our brow versus take a hold of the substance in which God has for us. We've all probably been here before. This person offended me. I'm offended. All of a sudden, as if we have some type of right to be offended. When you don't know what they did. You don't know what they said. What's the subject matter there? He goes back. Me. I'm the subject. This always caused so much grief anytime I would teach it at my ministry school. Offenses are taken, not given.
That's true.
Offenses are not they're not given, they're taken. You literally have to take offense to something. And when we start taking offense, it starts building. Like, I see it in my mind is like, you know those like little plastic like white picket fences? And you see, oh, God, this person offended me. I took offense to this. And you stick it into the ground. And then this thing sticks in the ground. And then you get another one and it sticks into the ground. And you get another one and it sticks in the ground. What have you built? A boundary. I mean, a wall. A barrier. You've now put something between you and the thing that offends you, but instead of dealing with the issue in our heart, we call it a boundary to spiritualize and make it sound like we're practicing healthy psychology all of a sudden, instead of just dealing with the issue in our heart. So then we find ourselves in those arguments with the people that we haven't even had a conversation with inside of our mind because we've built an offense about something that maybe they've done or done to somebody else. Secondhand offense is worse than secondhand smoking. You ever been offended at somebody else for what they did to someone else you care about? A while back, there was this public prophetic word that was given. And it was given to some friends of mine who I admire. And some other friends of mine who I dearly love heard it. But because the way that it was given, because it was about me, kind of rudely put, but also understanding the person who gave it and the spirit of who they are, you just kind of go with it. But it's hard to when that's happening, because you care about the person. And sometimes we'll take up an offense for somebody when they themselves aren't even offended. It was a hard word for me to swallow. I wasn't a fan of it. But it's easy, because we care about somebody, to get mad about a situation or a circumstance that somebody else is experiencing. But we have to remember, even now I have friends in my life that are going through things, and I have friends that are, I wish they weren't having to face the battles that they're facing right now, and sometimes it's attributed to other people in their life. But I also have to remember why, in the midst of it, I have a ministry called Love Speaks. I can't get mad at this person, even though I want to, and they're causing the pain. They're causing the grievances in this person's life. But I also have to remember that we do not war against flesh and blood. And I have to take a step back and go, God, what are you doing in this person's life? So offenses build barriers because you don't want to get offended again by the same thing. That doesn't sound fun at all. So we'll put up something and we'll spiritualize it and justify it. Maybe even say this person has this kind of spirit. Just to really push in the criminalization of who they are type thing. Meanwhile, the real issue lies within inside of us. And so the unwillingness to deal with that thing and that's where we'll find ourselves in a cycle.
It could be we just don't know how to handle the situation.
Yeah.
Because, offensive behavior
Right.
We don't have to be offended by the offensive behavior, but it's like, you're walking downtown and there's someone, who's on drugs and they're cussing and spitting and you avoid them because you just don't know how to handle the situation.
Right. Well, there's a difference between and see that's more of a hypothetical scenario, in the sense of well, no, it's not because it's downtown. But I live down there. I work down there. I know. But in that, there's a difference between all right, clearly there's somebody that's something special is going on in their life. I'm going to go on the other side of the road. That's not necessarily taking offense. Taking offense is like a wound in the mind and in the heart to someone from a behavior that they did. And while that thing could be wrong on their behalf, the problem that we have, especially as believers, is our response is our responsibility. It's how we filter it. We want to be, the devil's doing this to me. You sure it's not just the bad decisions you've made? I'm struggling and I'm being attacked and no, you haven't gotten a job in a while. You've been living on credit card. It's not really the devourer, it's the lack of the working. But we think like that sometimes. And it sounds offensive when I put it that way, but that's the reality. Even when I ran a ministry school, I'm gonna do this by faith and put it all on credit card. No, you're not. Well, I was told I should come here. I'd rather help you raise money and to see if there's favor on you being here than you to put this on credit card and watch you struggle every time. That's not faith. That's credit. The Lord didn't say I give each person a measure of credit. I give each person a measure of faith. And so the Lord, this person told me I should come do this. Well, I run the school. I say no. I'm looking out for the betterment of that person. I'm not just looking at it for the next few months. I'm not looking at it if it increases my attendance and my numbers, which then it will affect my pay. And I have to look at it from the better, how is this going to affect that person down the road? So these places, offense is really a hard one because sometimes people they do hurtful things. And there's times where we just seeking to understand versus be understood. The problem is when something painful happens to us, we want that person to be held accountable. I've even found myself, even when we're at work, and because of lately there's been a number of issues where I've found with our support staff not doing their job. And I'm like, I want someone to be held accountable for not doing their job. Meanwhile, they may not even have the tools that they need in order for them to do their job. Which then eventually affects me having to do mine. But I started wanting justice instead of extending mercy. Because the reality is they're the people that ultimately hurt us, they're more than likely carrying some type of pain from something else. And they're lashing out of that. I think about any time that I lash out and I realize I've done it, it's probably because I'm lashing out of something else going on in my life. And so I'm flustered, I'm frustrated, I'm bothered by something. And instead of me dealing with it, I'm internalizing it, I'm mulling it over, whatever it might be. And if you really think about mulling something over, Like, you're just going to chew on it. I think about, like, cows chewing cud when I think about mulling something over, which sounds weird, but when you think about it, it's literally what we do with stuff. We digest something, and then we bring it back up as if we have we have 4 different stomachs, or how many stomachs a cow has. And we keep living on the same offense at times. We never let it go to rest. So, another way we can look at strongholds, they're like a bouncer. I wanted to be a bouncer when I was younger, but I wasn't tall enough. So, I never could be a bouncer. But they stand at the door of your heart and your mind, limiting contact. Because if it can't be touched, it can't be hurt. It can't be agitated, it can't fester. No, I don't want to talk about that. I don't want to do that or whatever. So that we develop these, and I'm not talking about your deepest, darkest secrets all the time, but when you find yourself in a situation or a circumstance and something comes up, and instead of dealing with it, we choose avoidance. Because there's a stronghold there. There's a bouncer there. We don't want to go there because then it's like that can of snakes that you open and they all come out. But if you think about it, then the can of lies is going to be opened up and we can get rid of all of them. But if just the touch of the hem of his garment can bring healing to the woman with the issue of blood, but we're not allowing the touch of anything to happen, there's a good chance we're going to miss the touch of the hem of his garment, touching our minds and hearts in these areas that we're protecting. The greatest example of a stronghold in Scripture is the time where God's people, the Israelites, were facing some of the greatest captivity and oppression they had ever had before. Day in and day out, they're crying out for salvation. They were waiting for a promised I must have got disrupted here because I wrote promised prophetic promise. It was actually a promised prophetic promise. From so many proven prophets. Then finally God sent the salvation they longed for, that they were crying out. But there was a stronghold in their minds. Because of the external circumstances, they did not accept the salvation, nor did they recognize it when it was there.
Too many years of enslavement.
Mm-hmm. So you know which time I'm talking about. That's the question. There's a number of times. I always find it interesting that we have Jesus experts. Jesus wouldn't do this. Jesus wouldn't do that. You never see Jesus talking to these people. Even while Jesus was walking with the people of God, they did not recognize who he was. How did we become such Jesus experts? They didn't recognize the salvation that was walking with them day in and day out. Because he didn't line up with the supportive strongholds in their mind in the way that things had to happen. They were expecting for him to come in on a white horse, sword drawn, lightning behind him probably. And instead, he came in on a donkey. With 12 ragtag kids, teenagers, young adults. And that was the most oppressive, dark time of their lives. And Jesus was right there in the midst. And they're getting offended by each other. Because you got Israelites becoming tax collectors. You got the Romans. You got all these people. All this stuff is happening. They're going through hell, literally. And Jesus was right there. So I propose an idea is that when we're going in the midst of our strongholds and in the midst of our mind, no matter what's going on, in the midst of our hearts, regardless of the pain that we're going through, Jesus is right there. In it. And if we can discern Jesus in the midst of it, that thing will collapse. That stronghold will fall apart. That lie will be dispelled. That hurt will be healed. The clarity will return back to our minds. The offenses, and instead of building a wall, we'll begin to build bridges and we'll live out reconciliation. And we'll find rest again. But we're supposed to have the mind of Christ. And today I've had this thought the last couple days, but today I kind of vocalized a little bit of it. Because I started asking, Lord, what does having your mind look like? What's that really look like when it comes down to it? And you kind of pointed out two different areas. You said, well, Wesley, my mind looks something like being patient, being kind, not having envy of anything or anyone, not boasting in anything, not being arrogant or rude, not insistent on having my own way. The Lord never pushes his own way through, it's kind of always presented as like an idea. Not irritable or resentful. He finds no joy whether the wrongdoing is done to us or us doing the wrongdoing, but he rejoices with truth. That his mind looks something like love, joy, peace, long-suffering, kindness, goodness, faithfulness, gentleness, and self-control. Which is nothing more than 1 Corinthians 13 or Galatians 5. The definition of love or the fruits of the Spirit. That's what his mind looks like. And I think if we, moving forward in the days to come, the more we can get rid of these areas of strongholds and offenses, and allow the Lord to come into those places. Because even the wounds that are sitting behind those doors, the wounds that are sitting behind these walls, they're more precious to him than the scar you're going to carry from them. There was a time in my life that, like, as a 39-year-old who's been involved in ministry stuff for almost half my life, more than half my life, I think, at this point. I don't know. I can't do math. I'd seen a lot of things. And when in seeing a lot of things, you see a lot of things that aren't so great. It's to the point where you find out, well, this pastor fell and this church has this going on. Yeah, well, as long as it still involves people, you're going to have something going on probably. That's kind of the way it goes. And so, and I carried a lot of burdens. I carried a lot of weight from it. A lot of hurt, a lot of stress. And one day, in a church service when I was living in San Diego, found myself in this moment, this encounter with the Lord. And I walked up to him, and he had, like, you know those, like, old, like, TV carts you would see, like, at school, like when it was like rainy day and it was like a movie day. Yeah. And so I saw him with one of those, and it was like stacked high with trophies and awards and medals and achievements and all these things. And he's taking him and he's putting him into this vast treasury room. And I said, Lord, what are you doing? And he goes, oh, I'm putting these in here into this treasury room for safekeeping. So I start helping him, because that's what you do when you see a friend moving. Instead of just looking at him and let me help you. So I start handing him things off of this cart. And I was like, well, what are these? And he goes, oh, these are your badges of honor, your scars, your wounds, the things that you hold on to, that you've held on to for a long time, because, we always talk about the thing that we went through that left us limping in life, so to speak. That's like a badge of honor. Well, this scar here, I got this, And I broke. And he's taking these awards and these trophies and these medals, and he's putting it into this treasury room for safekeeping. And they're my wounds and my battle scars and all the stuff that I've carried for all the years through my life. And he said, you just need to let these go. They're actually more valuable to me than for you to carry them anymore. You don't need to hold on to them anymore. And so I'm still helping him. And we've run out of trophy, and all of a sudden it becomes like Santa's Christmas sack. And there's more all of a sudden. But now it's no longer trophies, it's no longer awards or anything like that. It's like little Tupperware containers. And it's like a piece of like decaying heart. Taking it and he's putting it into this treasury room, and I knew that he was taking the areas of my heart that had been broken, that had been decayed, the things that have been offended, where I've put strongholds, where I've carried my wounds in my heart, the rejections, whatever it may have been, and he's taking it and he's putting it into this treasury room. Because the things that we've carried on through our lives, he finds more value and worth in it to put into this place for safekeeping, that we don't have to hold on to them anymore. We can finally let them go. Because they have no real value to us. We're holding on to them because we are afraid of them hurting, But if we could just let them go and allow God to be God, we will find ourselves healed. He'll touch our minds, He'll touch our hearts, and we'll be set free. We'll be restored, and we'll be able to live without this feeling of, well, something bad's going to happen, because it's been 48 days, and that's when, in every 50 days, something bad happens, or however it is that we create this way of thinking. Prior to this moment and this experience in my life, I lived in this mental place of, I knew every 4 to 6 months, depression was going to rear its head, and I was going to have an ugly episode, and then I would just want to hide for like a week. I didn't know what to call it at that point. I was just like, I don't know, I'm emotional during this time. Because I was carrying all these wounds, I was carrying all the stuff and the things that I've endured and the abuse I went through as a child, and I've been through hell. I smell like the smoke down there. That's how we think. Well, I was a part of this move of God, and it fell out, and but I'm still walking. It's kind of like, even we have a saying, don't trust anybody that says that they've been through revival that don't walk with a limp. And I literally blew out my knee in a revival. I'd rather walk without a limp instead of people thinking that I've been through revival. But if we allow Him, if we make room for Him in our hearts, in our minds, we will find that so much of that warfare will dissipate. Doesn't mean that we're not going to have moments of it. But the constant battle that seems to be going on all the time, and I get it. I was going through it before we started. Probably just pushed it aside long enough to go through this. But bringing Him into the midst of it brings the clarity of going, all right, I can see Him. And I can see His purposes in the midst of this. And then we just give Him the battle. Give Him the wound. Give Him the scar. And He'll take it. He'll take it on. So that we don't have to carry it. Anything before we close? Lord, I just ask right now, God, you know where the treasure is in our lives. And you know all the broken places, all the deconstructed places, the offenses, the wounds, the hurts. And I just ask, God, the same Jesus that said that the Spirit of the Lord is upon me and He has anointed me to bind up the brokenhearted, to bring freedom to the captive, that Jesus that made that proclamation and walked in the fulfillment of that prophecy. That he would come and visit our lives. That he would bring healing and restoration to our minds and to our hearts. That he knows every tear and he's kept them in a vial, that he keeps record of every toss and turn, every sleepless night. It's written down in his ledger. That he would come and bring peace and bring solace. That Holy Spirit, you would come and you would comfort in times of mourning, in times of grieving, and then in the hurt. That you would bring wholeness. And God, wherever it is that we have strongholds in our minds, we open the doors to you, God. Would you come and turn the strongholds into gardens? We just pray this in Jesus' name.